Exodus 16, and we'll turn over a couple verses in chapter 17 as well. But exciting study. I'm glad we're going to be visiting about some of these issues. One of the classic comedic acts, I'm sure that most of you have seen this in your life, probably multiple times, actually was made famous by Abbott and Costello. What is the sketch? Yeah, who's on first? That was actually written and performed before Abbott and Costello made it really famous, but it was 1938 when they first made that sketch famous, and of course became a regular part of their shtick. So who is on first? Any of you know it well enough to know who's on the other bases? What's on second? I don't know on third. I don't remember either. What made that a classic? I mean, yeah, the humor of it. What'd you say, Rosalie? Yeah, timing, right? Wasn't that oftentimes that is, Donald, ask the question, what's the secret of telling a joke? Ask me.
What's the secret of telling a joke?
Timing. Yeah. Any kind of comedic act, which obviously I'm not very good at. Timing, though, is what is so important, and that's what makes that sketch such a classic. What we're going to look at today, though, is exactly what God will do at times in order to teach us to grow our faith. And it has to do with timing. Sometimes when we pray, don't we are impatient. We want to have our prayer answered right away. And sometimes it's all on the basis of timing. When in God's time does he want to answer that prayer? So as we approach our study today in Exodus chapter 16, you'll remember last week we spent some time talking about the miraculous event when God brought them by a mighty hand through the Red Sea. Still, we even say it today. Oh, that rivals the parting of the Red Sea, we think, a miracle. But that was such an impactful moment. Not just for the 1.5 million to 2 million Jews that went through that, but also because of God's judging the nation, which he had said he was going to do 400 years earlier. The nation that puts you into bondage, I will judge. And he did judge them by the plagues and by destroying Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea, didn't he? Does anybody remember any documents from Egypt that talk about the army being destroyed in the Red Sea? No, because you never will find that, especially in a system that had a whole bunch of gods, and all of those gods were challenged by the God of Israel and defeated. And it's also true that they will never write about their defeats, will they?
We need George. His mom or grandma is having a little bit of trouble.
George? Abramovitz? Yeah, Tamara, thank you. Thank you, George.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you don't. And you too, Paul and Patty. George, keep us posted. So God was doing these miraculous things, and they're rehearsed all through the Old Testament, even into the New Testament, the story of the Red Sea. But as I pointed out at the close of last week, in chapter 15 of Exodus, they have this song of Moses. They are singing and praising God for this miraculous deliverance from the Egyptians. There's no record in the Egyptians of this embarrassing defeat. They would never record something like that for posterity. That's what makes the Bible really a unique book from ancient times, is God wanted, under his Holy Spirit inspiration, he wanted the defeats as well as the victories recorded. You do not find any other royal documents written in any other culture of the ancient Near East that write about their defeats, about their embarrassments. But the Bible, for teaching purposes, even includes some of those things where people have lapses and failures. And let's go right to looking at Moses killing an Egyptian. Who wrote that? Who wrote that story in the Bible? Moses wrote it. God told him to, but Moses wrote it. Don't you think if it was just a man-made book, Moses would have conveniently left that little story out? Or David with Bathsheba. But God wanted us to know that they were just regular mortal people, just like us, with the same passions, same temptations, same likes and dislikes. And even when they failed, they responded properly to God. And those are the reasons why we have these stories told to us and recorded permanently in God's holy word, so that we can learn. That's what the New Testament says, right? That the Old Testament is our schoolmaster. It's like when we read these stories, it's like we're going to class and learning how God dealt with things, so that we can learn God will still work in our situations. That's what today's story is all about. So we come to Exodus chapter 16. Children of Israel have moved into the desert of Sinai. Remember the crossing of the Red Sea. They're shouting, and 3 days later they're at Marah, and they're doubting. What was the problem at Marah? When they got to Marah, what was the problem? They found water, but it could not be any water they could imbibe. They could not drink it. It was not potable, we would say. It was bitter. And yet God, a huge amount of water. What did the people say? What did they do? They started grumbling. Why did you bring us out here to die? All of this water and we can't drink it. Well, don't know why the emblem of the stick, but cut that branch off, throw it in the water, and now the water's, you can drink it. Okay. So they go a little further into this wilderness. And who's leading them? As they move further into the wilderness, who's leading them? It's God. Cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. It's God's presence. God is taking them into this circumstance that is going to test them. So they get in, a month into this thing, and they have run out of the provisions that they brought out of Egypt. All of a sudden, there's no lack of food. Nothing's growing in this desert. I've been in the Sinai Peninsula. It's just a terribly inhospitable place. Totally desert, rocky mountains. Nothing, very little vegetation. That's why Moses, as a shepherd, had to travel so far from Midian all the way out to the Mount of God, Mount Horeb. And God's leading them back there. Mount Horeb, the Mount of God, also known as Mount Sinai, right? Okay, so when we come to Exodus 16, this thing's kind of coming to a crescendo. They're going to be, once again, accusing Moses of leading them into a wilderness where they're all going to die. And, of course, this is a common theme. But what we want to learn from this is that God makes provision for us just when he times it to do it. Okay? So I wanted you to join me in verse 11 of chapter 16. And we're going to look at this thesis, this idea that complaining often demonstrates a lack of our faith. Okay, let's just think on that principle for a moment. Complaining often illustrates a lapse in our faith. Verse 11 says, and the Lord said unto Moses, spake unto Moses, saying, I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. So when they take these murmurings, these complaints to Moses, they're really complaining about God, aren't they? I mean, now it's going to be obvious, even from our text, that they're going to go to Moses and complain. We don't have water. We don't have food. Do something. And Moses is going to actually say, hey, why are you telling me this? God's the one who brought us this. So you're not complaining just to me. You're complaining to God. And you're showing a lack of faith in doing so. All right, keep reading in verse 12. I've heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Speak unto them, saying, at even ye shall eat flesh, and in the morning ye shall be filled with bread, and ye shall know that I am the Lord your God. And it came to pass that that evening the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay round about the hosts. And when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, it is manna. For they wist not what it was. Manna literally means, what is it? Right? And Moses said unto them, this is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat. Okay. So when they started complaining, and if you read the verses before verse 11, they're once again saying to Moses, why did you bring us out here to die? We'd have been better off back in Egypt. Yes, it had been terrible bondage. Yes, we'd have been slaves, but at least we would have the leeks and the garlic. We would have had the food of Egypt. Oh, we miss it so much. Isn't it true that sometimes we just reminisce, and things that we reminisce about are not near as nice as we reminisce about them as they were when we were going through them? But these people are accusing Moses of something really insidious, that both he and God would orchestrate this circumstance to kill all of them in the desert. Now, they've already seen the Red Sea. They've already been to Marah. They've seen the handiwork of God in such a miraculous way. But isn't it just like us? I mean, we see God do things that we just stand back and say, wow, God. But yet, it's so easy for us to slip into a condition where we just say, God, where are you? But every one of those circumstances, no matter how difficult, if we have the right attitude, if we have the right heart about it, it's going to be a teachable moment for us. Sometimes we can learn our greatest lessons in the difficulties. None of us like it, but sometimes it's the best way we can learn even God's love and his provision is in difficult circumstances. You'll remember in 2 Corinthians I've talked about this before, but in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul is writing, and he's writing about himself. And he talks about, you may remember the context. He said, I knew a man about 14 years ago. I don't know if I was in the body or out of the body. I don't know. But remember, he says that he was caught up into heaven, and he saw things. God gave him a vision of heaven. And in his own words, he says, and it is not lawful for me to tell you what I saw. The abundance of revelations God gave me. And then as soon as he has said that, he says, and God gave me a thorn. How many times did he pray that the thorn in his life would be removed? 3 times. And I prayed thrice, 3 times, that God would remove this thorn. And he didn't. But Paul goes on to say that he learned his most valuable spiritual lesson, not in the heavenly experience. In fact, what conclusion did Paul come to about why this thorn was given to him? Yeah, to remind him that God was in control and to humble him. It said, and because of the abundance of the revelations, all of these things that he couldn't even speak about because God had prohibited him from doing it. But he said, because of the abundance of revelations, God gave me a thorn, a messenger of Satan, to buffet me, to humble me. And then he goes on to say, you know what? I didn't learn my most valuable lesson in the heavenly experience. I learned my most valuable lesson in the thorn. Because God taught him, my grace is sufficient for you. That's what these tests are all about, even for the children of Israel in the wilderness. They come to these places, and you can just imagine taking 1.5 million to 2 million people into this barren wasteland of a desert-like place. They're not stopping and planting crops and raising their cattle and sheep on grazing pasture. This is barren. And so they start complaining, why did you do this? Why did you bring us? We'd be better off back in Egypt and dying there than dying here. You're going to kill all of us out here. And Moses is going to go to God and say, Lord, they're about to kill me over this. Okay. Let me ask a couple questions. So what did God do in the aftermath of their complaining? God told Moses, this is what's going to happen. What is it? What's God going to do to provide for this? Tara? Okay. Going to send quail. Any quail hunters in the group? Some of you done some quail hunting? I know some people who, I've never done it. I know some people who have done it and love doing it, and they really consider quail hunting a very significant sporting hunt. But quail are good to eat. There are a lot of other gamey animals out there. Quail's not one of them. But these people complained about not having any meat. So God said, oh yeah? And so the next morning, or that evening, these quail apparently just traveling a long distance just get exhausted, and they all just plop down right in the camp. And I guess it's just get as many as you want. Mike, how do you fix a quail? Marty, no? Okay. Do you do it like a chicken? Yeah. Okay, if a bunch of quail end up in my yard and I go around and pick some up, I'm calling you to come and help me, because I would just say, oh, these are cute. Let's make them pets. Although Maddie would not, she would not handle that. That's all right. My dog would tell me how to handle the quail. But they had so much food. It happens again later where the quail come in. They just land in the camp, and they eat so much quail that they get sick of it. Okay? But the other thing is, this is the beginning of manna. Just reading what I read, or what you've read in the past about this, how would you describe manna? Fluffy bread. Okay, good. Anybody else want to? I mean, I don't think it's that big. Yeah, I don't think it's. It is. It's described as hoarfrost. You just, I mean, when the dew lifted, it's just there on the ground. But it's frosted flakes. I don't know. It does, though, describe in other places that, what's the taste of it? Yeah, it's got a sweetness to it, right? Kind of a honey, natural sweetness to it. But this is the beginning of manna. And God is going to provide this for 40 years. At the end of 40 years, they're going to come to Moses and complain again. This is a whole new generation, because most of them have died off. But they're going, you know, we're really, really tired of this manna. Pam. It is. Yes. Yep. To the full. Good. Excellent. You're exactly right. Verse 3 of that chapter talks about them complaining. This is part of their complaint. And God meets their need in an extraordinary way. Except God puts some parameters on what you're going to do, how you're going to gather this food each day. All right? So we see that complaining demonstrates a lack of faith. But in order to trust God, we need to do it His way. Okay, we need to fulfill His desire. That's, again, an exercise of our faith, is do what God commands or tells us we should do. All right, so in verses 16 and following, let's look at these parameters God established. And even though He tells them how they're supposed to gather up this food, there are some that are not going to do it. Okay, verse 16. And this is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. Now, these are going to be the rules and regulations about eating manna or gathering manna. Gather of it every man according to his eating, an omer for every man according to the number of your persons. Okay, weights and measures. You're very common, I'm sure, with the weights and measurements known as an omer. How much? Probably 2 quarts. Yeah, between 1 and 2 quarts per person. Okay, I'm not sure. But every day, someone in the home was designated to go out and collect. Your marginal said 1 quart. It does say 2. Whew. I was very confident I did not want to correct my wife in front of everybody, but it's 2 quarts. Okay. So we don't use that measurement. That would not be a common thing, but that puts things in a little bit different perspective for us. So if there were 6 people in the home, they would collect 6 quarts. No, 12 quarts. An omer per person. But it's very interesting what it says. It continues in verse 17. And the children of Israel did so and gathered some more, some less. In other words, some had fewer people in the family, some had more people. They collected for everyone. And when they did meet it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. They gathered every man according to his eating. Okay, so God said, this is how they're supposed to gather this every day. We're not going to read it, continue to read here in the text, but how many days did they do this per week? 6 days. And then what were they supposed to do? By the way, it also tells us, reading on, that some people decided, man, this is a good thing, but I'm not so sure it'll be here tomorrow. So I'm going to get what? Extra. I'm going to store some. What happened to that which they tried to store up overnight? Oh, I mean, doesn't it describe it in such a way that it just is, you know? I mean, it says when they looked at it, it was full of worms and it stunk. All right? After one night of trying to hoard it. So they learned real quick, we get what we need, we don't store it, except when? On the Friday evening that begins Sabbath, right? Now this is really interesting. I don't know if you've thought about it before. This is before the law. I mean, God has not given, they're not to Mount Sinai yet. So God has not established the Sabbath. But he's telling Moses on the 7th day, I don't want anybody doing any work. I want them just to rest and to reflect upon God's goodness and to worship. Okay? And so that principle is introduced even before God actually puts it into the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. Same thing happened, though. Some of these people tried to get extra or didn't gather enough for 2 days. They went out the next morning looking for it on the Sabbath, what would be the Sabbath, and it wasn't there. So they learned real quick, you better follow the rules that God establishes on this. If you try to hoard it, it'll get bad. On the day that we approach the rest day, get double portion, it'll be fine for that weekend. Okay, my question is, why did God do this in such a way that every day they had to go out and gather it? And it was, again, if they just gathered a little bit, then everybody was full in that household. Sometimes they gathered a lot for a bigger home, and everybody was full. But why did it spoil? Why did they have to do it every day? Thought, Steve? I saw your hand first. Okay, good. What did you say, Dennis? Okay, obedience, faith. Yeah, they had to, you have to do this in a regimented way, following the, but this is a faith issue. It really is, isn't it? If they could just hoard a bunch of it and it stayed good for months, you know, just add a little MSG or something and let it not spoil. Does MSG work? Is that what MSG does? MSG makes things last longer? Flavor enhancer. Oh, okay, never mind. Well, I imagine they got to the point where they wanted manna with MSG on it, you know. But we know, like Chinese food, you eat that and 3 hours later you're starving. Okay, never mind. So this daily provision, it taught the children of Israel that there's a daily reliance upon God. Isn't that interesting? I mean, God wants us to do the same faith issue. He wants us to be a daily reliance on him for provision and for experiencing his love. But so often, and that's the challenge of a materialistic, God-blessed situation like we live in modern times. You know, so much of human history has been, give us this day our daily bread. It's you know, the vast majority of people in history, they spent all of their time, all of their energy trying to make just enough for one day. That's the whole idea of some of Jesus' parables, even, with getting paid a denarii, a penny, a 1 day's worth of wages, right? But every day they had to eke out a living. For the Christian, though, we get to the New Testament and God says, hey, have faith and you'll never go without. Now, you may not have a hoard of things you can store, but you can have daily provision. God will meet your needs. I've never seen God's children forsaken or his kids begging bread. God is going to meet those needs if we trust by faith. But there is this principle, a teaching moment here for the children of Israel to realize we need God daily. And it's still true. It's really kind of one of the curses of modern Christianity that we are so affluent, we are so materialistic, that sometimes we just forget God because you know what? I've got enough. And I've got gift cards and coupons to Hardee's and McDonald's and Chick-fil-A, and I'm not going to starve. It could all happen fast. I don't know. I mean, there have been just little hints of how cataclysmic things could become in very short order. Most of this group lived through 9/11. We saw how quickly everything shut down. And then how hard it became to find commodities. Remember that? Empty shelves? Supply chain stuff? It can happen so fast. And most of us don't have much stored up. If the electricity grid went down, what would most of us do in a few days? Well, I hope we would have faith that God would provide as he did with the children of Israel. Okay, so complaining often exhibits a lack of faith in God. That's what happened when the children murmured about it. Then God gave them abundance. Everybody was full every day if they followed the prescription and the plan. But God also is going to use this more as a teachable moment when we get further into the story just a little bit and find, okay, the food's there every morning, but now there's no water. Let me draw your attention over to chapter 17. We'll read a few verses there. But trusting God for our needs will work out for us faith. Okay? So again, it's this trust issue. Verse 1 of chapter 17. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the children did chide with Moses. This is a different word than complaining. They weren't just complaining. In the past they complained, they murmured, just this undercurrent of dissatisfaction. But when they chided with Moses, what's that? What do you think that infers? Yeah, they're really getting mad now. And really, it's got a threat tone to it, doesn't it? And they did chide with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? Okay, so Moses is pointing out, hey, you've been following that same cloud, that same pillar of fire. You know God brought us to this place. And what has God done every time we had need? God had always done something when He led them into that cul-de-sac at the Red Sea. The same God who took them in is going to take them out. They had seen God work over and over and over. What's one of Jesus' favorite sayings to His disciples, even after they'd seen miracles, 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 including resurrecting people from the dead? What did Jesus say all the time? Oh, ye of little faith. Don't you know? God's going to take care of His kids. It may not always be in our time. It may not always be the way we want it. But here, what does that statement mean there at the end of verse 2? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? What is that all about? What's another word for tempt? Yeah, it's test. Why are you testing the Lord? Haven't you seen Him work over and over? You know, Jesus is going to quote these scriptures from Exodus 16, Exodus 17, when He's tempted, tested in the wilderness by Satan. Remember when He said, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word which proceeds from the mouth of God? That's this story right here. And so Moses said, don't you understand? Every time these things happen, God is testing our faith. Why are you testing God? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses and said, Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? Notice they didn't complain about food, because they had manna every day. But they are without water. And Moses cried unto the Lord and said, What shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee the elders of Israel, and with thy rod, wherewith thou smote the river, take it in thine hand and go. Verse 6, final thought. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So, following God's directive, Moses gets up on this huge rock. Trust me, in the Sinai Peninsula, there are plenty of huge boulders. Some of you have traveled out in the southwest part of the United States and seen how some of those rocky hills and mountains associated around the Rocky Mountains, they're huge rocks. That's what Moses apparently stands on. But did you catch the subtlety of it? What did God say to Moses about getting with his rod up on that rock? Anybody catch it? Yes, good. Connie, thank you. Verse 6. Behold, God speaking, behold, I will stand before thee upon the rock. Again, Jesus talks about these things. Jesus talks about in John's gospel that he is the bread of life. Remember now, so what's Moses going to do to get water here? And this rock is going to split, and the inference is it doesn't just trickle out, it's a gush of water. it's going to have to be to take care of 1.5 million to 2 million people plus all their animals. And it does. It turns into a huge source of water. And all of these people who 10 minutes earlier were grumbling and complaining and ready to stone Moses because they lacked faith in a difficult circumstance, now they see God work. But I was struck by what Connie pointed out. God said, I will stand with you, Moses. It's not Moses. It doesn't have anything to do with this staff. It's God that splits this rock, and out comes the water. This is living water. This is what Jesus refers to with the woman at the well. If you knew who it was that you were talking to, you'd ask me for water, and I would give you living water. Oh, I want that, so I don't ever have to come and draw water out again. Remember, that was her take on that thing. So this whole story of manna and God's provision and water in the wilderness and God's provision, it's Jesus fulfills these pictures when he is the bread of life, when he is living water. And of course, these are not things that the people immediately related it to, but in hindsight, we can see how God worked all of these things out according to his divine plan. But everything, I think Dennis used the word faith. It all comes down to faith, whether they're in the wilderness needing the water or whether they're in the New Testament with Jesus believing he's the living water, or whether it's today. And again, I just want to remind you, it's so easy for us to forget all of the many benefits God has given us in the past. And why have you brought us out here to die in the wilderness? Sometimes he's just letting us know once again that we can trust him, especially in our desperate conditions. All right? Well, hope you'll meditate a little bit on these thoughts this week, and we'll look forward to next week picking up with it. Be safe out there, and we'll see you after church, but be careful through the rest of the week. God bless. Have a great day. We'll keep you posted on Wednesday's plan.